we can get started, I just want to say good afternoon, and I hope you're all having a great day. And so welcome to our Changemaker20, and I want to thank you for spending your afternoons with us. If this is your first time, this is a platform where we do get to chat with our subject matter experts in an open forum for all of you guys to ask questions and get to speak with them directly. So definitely open up your chats down below, and we'd love to hear from you. So if you guys don't know, you guys can just check down below. There's a chat function. And when you guys are inputting any of your questions or just want to have a nice chat, remember to hit not just to panelists, but to all panelists and attendees, and so everybody can hear what you guys want to ask and also just hear from you. Today we have Cherry Rose Tan. She is a fifth generation entrepreneur, and Cherry Rose lives and breathes what it means to be and create companies that matter. She has 12 years of expertise in psychology and has guided thousands through the trenches of mental health, particularly on coaching mental resilience and executive communication. And right now is a time where there's a lot of difficult conversations to be had. And so if you feel you're a person that may have felt that they've had a difficult conversation over the past week, just give me a yes down below on the chat. And so we know where everyone is and where everyone's at today. So in this difficult time, we're going to explore how to communicate and bring up these uncomfortable feelings amidst the change and uncertainty. So how do we go about confronting these conversations, not just ourselves, but our family and our team? And so Cherry Rose, where do we even start with this?
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, welcome everybody. Like really excited that we're all engaging in this conversation together. So in terms of starting points, I mean, when Daniel and I talked, we were thinking about topics that were really interesting to talk about. And this came up for us just thinking about COVID-19. And so, part of just some context about why we're bringing up this topic. So I currently run a mental health movement that's called #RealTalk. And our community, we have 200 tech CEOs. And, part of the reality right now with COVID is that there's obviously a lot of unpredictability coming up. There's just a lot of things happening with regards to personal lives. It's not really normal for us to stay stuck in a place for a long time, not being able to physically see our friends and family and colleagues. And then on top of that, on top of navigating the personal, people are also dealing with just a lot of business responsibility. And so, as a first start, Daniel, since you were asking, I think one of the things that I kind of want people to know when it comes to navigating tough conversations is that there's really layers to it. And something that I tell people is that I notice, especially in a lot of communities right now, especially talking to business communities, so like a lot of executives, that sometimes there's a lot of emotions coming up about people's communication where people are feeling like shame, or people are feeling guilt, or people are feeling judgment around like, oh, like there's something that I'm going through, or there's something I need to communicate, and I feel really badly, like as a person, to like communicate it, or I'm dealing with these uncomfortable emotions. And one of the things that is important is just to also like have it all in context, right? So just even with COVID-19 right now, to be really frank, like a lot of us are in a place where there's been so much change. And so for many people right now, we're dealing with the shock of that. And so, as like a first step, like I tell people when it comes to like hard conversations, we don't always have to go from like 0 to 100, because 0 to 100 is like putting a lot of sometimes unnecessary pressure on us, right? And also other people obviously understand that we're like, all of us are going through a tough time. And so like the 3 layers maybe to think about where we can have hard conversations is like, first layer being, okay, like, can I create a space for me to have the hard conversation with myself first, whether it's like talking to, having a conversation with myself about like, how is my business really doing? Or how is my marriage really doing? Then, when we have that level, and that level's got a stronger foundation, that we can go and take another step forward, right? So like now from 0 to 1 to 1 to 2. Okay, let's talk about having the conversation now with maybe our inner circle, our inner tribe. So it could be my spouse, it could be my co-founder. And then once we've built that layer, now we can go and take it a level further and now say, hey, now let me go have that conversation with, let's say, my company, or let's say my community.
Hmm. And so, for everyone
Mhm.
tuning in, I'd love to know what are some of the tougher conversations that you guys have had to have over this past month. Just let us know in the chat. But Cherry, one thing I wanted to know is how do you know we can be in a safe place to be transparent and disclose some of that personal information?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the analogy that I would give when it comes to disclosure is to actually think of it as an onion. And it's very purposeful, by the way, because, for example, me being in the mental health space where I do a lot of advocacy, we talk a lot about lifting the stigma or the shame around trauma, around mental illness, and all these other things. But what's really interesting is because I often work with executives, it's not always black and white, right? So of course, we want to create a place where it's safe to share, but I know there's a reality, and I'm not sure what people's situations are for people who are on this call right now. Like, maybe for some of you, you're in a situation where in your personal life or in your professional life, you know that those people that you want to share to, they're probably people who understand you. They're probably people who receive it well, or they're people who maybe understand about mental health or something that you're disclosing. And the reality is that maybe some of us belong to communities or environments where we're not sure where people lie. And so when it comes to sort of safely sharing, it's this onion analogy, which is that, okay, if I'm not sure where this other person is at, and you're sharing something that's very personal to you, something that's very vulnerable to you, it's important for us to remember that when we share, it's, you know, um, yes, it's, benefits us, but we also want to make sure that the person receiving it is also in a place where they can actually respect the sharing and able to to receive it properly. And so by kind of doing any analogies, so for example, like if I'm talking with somebody who's a newer, maybe I don't have as strong a relationship with them, I'm going to go and I'm going to take the first layer of my onion. I'm going to share this top part of vulnerability and,
Mhm.
and give it to them and sort of see, okay, looking at that, how are they receiving right now? And oftentimes, if they are in a place to receive, usually what happens, and especially we see this in a lot of the research, a lot of the psychology research, people will often reciprocate if
Mhm.
they are in the place to receive and to do that um, sort of exchange. So they'll often, kind of take their part of their onion and give it to you, and then from there you can kind of go deeper and deeper and do a little bit of that switch. And so, when it comes to safely sharing, we always, as I said before, we don't have to go from 0 to 100, right? Because sometimes that also makes people feel ungrounded, but we can go and say 0 to 1 and then kind of do that again.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so really taking the right steps so you don't jump in all the way and disclose everything all at once, but really just starting the conversation very very slowly and seeing if they're able to reciprocate and build that relationship from there. And earlier you were mentioning having that conversation with yourself first and having that first layer before anything else. And so how do you determine what a good conversation with yourself sounds like? How do you know it's not a narrative you're creating, and how do you know that it's an honest authentic conversation you're having?
Right. I so love that you asked this question, by the way, because um, to be really honest, I find that right now with what's happening with COVID is it's a confronting time, right? Like a lot of the things that we could have used to distract ourselves, to be really honest, they're kind of gone, right? Like if you were gonna go have, drinks with your coworkers after work, that's gone.
Mhm.
If you were gonna go and you had some hobbies outside, that's gone as well. And um, when it comes to um being able to distinguish between, let's say, a share that is getting at, let's say, the root, right? Versus something where we're staying stuck in our stories. Um, One of the distinctions that I often tell people is that you can tell by kind of looking at the framework that you're coming from. So, for example, oftentimes when we're dealing with uncomfortable emotions, especially when we're resisting, a lot of our shares or a lot of our and you can hear this in your language if you're quiet enough, like if you're not distracting yourself, you're going to notice that your language is all a lot of times about upset. That's kind of the energy of it. It's like, okay, like I was right with this thing, I was really wrong at this. This person wronged me. Like a lot of it's all right and wrong language. So it's that feeling of like somebody's to blame, whether it's me or somebody else. And where we really want to be able to shift into, and this is the power really about talking about the hard things, which is why even our movement is called #RealTalk, is that we educate people on the fact that, when it comes to something like mental health, it's like, sometimes people have a misconception that, oh, when we're talking about mental health, it's all just about sharing feelings. Like we're talking about our feelings and it's all fluffy and stuff like that. And what I tell people is actually like the capacity to talk about emotions. If you can have that capacity to talk about uncomfortable things, it's actually a business asset. So imagine like, where else can you have that layer of conversations? Like where else can I take that honesty and transparency and be able to do that? So for example, like having a tough conversation with my co-founder about maybe, you know, changing up the executive team or bringing on new investors or whatever it could be. And so where we're shifting instead of the upset is going into like, can we look at this from a place of what's working or what's not working, right? So it's like, okay, like if I'm looking at this objectively, these are the three things that are not working in my life. So
Mm-hmm.
you can still look at the places in your life that can maybe use more power or can use more assistance, but you're not coming from this emotion or language where it's like a lot of blame and a lot of upset. And
Mm-hmm.
it's important to be in that grounded place. Otherwise, upset, it makes it hard for us to solve problems and to talk about things. So,
Mm-hmm. And,
mhm.
and then going from where you just mentioned with being grounded, sometimes having that emotional stability to have these conversations is the most contributing factor to getting this across the right way. But oftentimes the most difficult conversation is with the people that are closest to you. And so how do you have those conversations with your family or your close friends, people that they just really know your buttons and they know how to push them. And it's really tough to get the point across.
Yeah, I love that you asked this because this is a big problem that's actually coming up, especially when I talk to a lot of our CEOs where um I mean, a lot of them are struggling right now, for example, with like, how do I keep a healthy relationship with my spouse who's in this with me right now, and we're also raising like our three kids who are also in the same space. um so I think the most important thing is to, how to describe it, it's like it's to know that the capacity, the ability to have hard conversations is really like a skill set that you can develop.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that preparation is not just us being conversation live with the person, but it's about almost the pre-work that we do beforehand. So for example, when I hold space for founders or investors to talk about their stuff, I mean, to be really frank, a lot of the conversations are not happy, right? Especially for people who've seen the stories we've released. Like I've had conversations with people about like divorce, about like, losing their loved ones, about surviving abuse, about dealing with like bipolar and OCD and dealing with the stigma of that, right? So some of these topics feel really heavy for people. And the thing is, like, I'm able to hold that space for people, and this is maybe something people don't naturally know because it seems like it just flows naturally, but I do a lot of pre-work. So for example, before I go into a tough conversation, I actually create a space for myself where like I'll journal, I'll like actually sit with myself and I'll feel right now, okay, before I go into this hard conversation, do I actually feel like, and the analogy I'm almost going to use, do I feel like I'm a clean slate? Like, it's almost like if I was to be a mirror for a person, if I was to be in a space where I could actually listen impartially, do I feel like I'm coming in with all my stuff clear? Or am I coming in with like, hey, Cherry Rose has got like this bag right here on the side that looks like it's probably anger. And she's got this other bag here that has to do with her self-worth. And so when I feel that I'm in a space, and I often tune into like my body, I'll tune into emotions where it's like there's something that feels kind of almost like unclean, like
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm holding back. I actually will do practices like, for example, I have different playlists just for emotion. So if I know that I'm feeling like sadness and I'm feeling like grief, and that's something that's going to maybe taint the conversation or shift the conversation in something that I'm going to be doing later on, I'll purposely like listen to that music in order to be able to actually release. So I actually don't have to do the releasing myself. I can have tools around it. And then I think the other powerful thing, especially depending on, let's say if you're doing the sharing, let's say in a personal context, you can build systems around it. So, for example, my partner and I, my life partner, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we both work in the tech industry. So you can imagine, you know, obviously my work is already quite, you know, there's a lot of emotional stuff that comes into it. And then we don't want to bring necessarily that heaviness into our relationship. And so, for example, we literally have a playbook that's like on Google Docs, Google Sheets, where we have an actual list of like all of our triggers. So it's like my partner knows that I get really triggered when I feel like he's not listening. I'm going to go like, I often go into anger. I'll, you know, and for example, for him, it's like, if I'm pushing a lot and actually he needs space, that's often a trigger for him. And so we have those things already set in our relationship so that before we start going and opening up all kinds of like, you know, all kinds of like really raw things, we can actually have this sort of playbook to be able to set a lot of these pieces.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe you can give us a little bit of a breakdown on how everyone can create their own playbook with their partners and or family. It sounds like that permission asking and expectation setting in the beginning really makes a big difference. And so how can we all create our own?
Yeah, great question. So I think some of the pieces that are really important, a lot of people don't often know their own leadership or communication style. And a lot of the playbook actually has to do with self awareness and also awareness of the other person. So, a little bit nerdy, but when I first started dating my partner, this is like 3 months in. Um, I had a list of like psychometric tests that I sent to him, and I said, "Hey, I'm sending these to you because I really feel this would benefit our relationship because I really want to know what you need. Like, I really want to know what nourishes you." And I didn't know that much about him at the time. So, for example, some of the tests that we actually have listed, so this is part of our spreadsheet. We have the Myers-Briggs test, which I mean is very traditional. That's the 16 personality types.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, I'm ENTJ. So when you
Yeah.
see those letters, that's the Myers-Briggs. We also have the fascination advantage, which actually has to do with brand communication, and that's all about your top two advantages for how you actually operate in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other big one that we also have is the love languages. So, for example, I know my partner's love languages by heart, and he also knows mine. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if we know that, then that means that ahead of time, then we don't have to keep bringing it up in every single conversation because it's
Mm-hmm.
already there.
Yeah.
And then the other big one that we've got in our playbook, really honestly, is um, this sort of like triggers and solutions or spreadsheets. So,
Mm-hmm.
and this comes from my background around like trauma informed work.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this list, and I'm trying to
Yeah.
visualize the columns for you, but it's like there's a list of like all of the triggers. So when I say triggers, these are things that like, you know, they're a little bit of touchy subjects. They're things that kind of shift you into less rational acts, right? So like the example I gave, when I feel people
Yeah.
don't listen, often start to lash out.
Yeah.
So I have the list of triggers. So we have that for each of us. Then we often also have a list of things that nourish us.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that I know, okay, like if I was to provide this, this would help recreate the safety for him or for me, so that we can go back to a place where we can actually listen to each other rather than react. So we've actually got actionable things. So for example, for me, it's like he kind of knows that if I'm in a bad space, he's just gonna say, "Hey, can I offer you a hug? Can we hug?" And then he'll just hold me until I'm in a place where I feel calmer,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can have the conversation.
That's awesome.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so those I think are really important to have if you're if
Uh-huh.
you're able to do them.
So I might ask you to send us a template on some of the what you mentioned so we can create something that people can
Sure.
see. And I mean, that's all the time that we have. And I felt like we only got to go through maybe two things, but there's so much more that I think not just myself, but everybody wanted to ask. And so I feel like we need to have you back sooner than later. And so for everyone tuning in, can you guys just leave either a yes or a maybe if you guys would like to have Cherry Rose come back? And maybe what we can do is we can set up an anonymous questionnaire for you guys to ask some of your tough conversations if you're not confident in asking them on this live chat, because I know that can be really hard. So that we can have Cherry Rose come in and we can really deep dive into some of that, because we had such great content today. And 20 minutes just went by super quick, and so I really apologize that we couldn't go through everything, but definitely, like, I want to explore that option. And so I want to thank you guys for all tuning in, and so definitely let's set that up. Let's put that together. Send us your questions, email to us, or we'll send it out to you guys, and I'd love to get that going. We are going to be continuing our virtual speaker series this week with tomorrow, though. And what we have tomorrow is a conversation with Rachel Parent. She's an amazing person as well. She, at 11 years old, became an activist fighting for our right to know what's in our food, particularly with GMO labeling and laws in Canada, which I thought was super, super interesting. She even had a debate at 11 years old, or at 12 years old, with Kevin O'Leary. And so it's really cool. And we are going to discuss the new realities of climate change and sustainable foods as we deep dive into what's happened over the last few weeks and the long-term effects it's had on our planet. So very insightful conversation tomorrow. And just to close off, I just want to thank you again, Cherry Rose, for coming in today. It was an amazing conversation. We are going to put together another time for us to have and continue this conversation, because I think there's a lot to take away and there's clearly a lot of interest. And so definitely going to explore that. But with that being said, I hope you all stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for everyone for being here as well.